Alrighty. It looks like everybody is making their way in here. But good morning. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today's webinar is going to focus on all things related to SnapPlus version 3. We will have Hava Blair from the SnapPlus team walking us through how to build a plan in SnapPlus, and then also how we can convert our V2 databases into V3. Along the way, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them, but let's put them in the chat. We have a couple additional staff members here on the call that are going to be monitoring the chat, and we will be sending responses via chat. But if there are also questions that we should pose to the group, we will stop and pause at the end of sections and answer those questions, and maybe even demo some of them if those are questions that warrant a demonstration. If you guys have questions or any issues with Zoom, please don't hesitate to reach out to Dan Smith. I saw his phone number is in the chat. I will also be putting my email and phone number in the chat. But other than that, I am going to turn it over to Hava.
All right, thanks, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. I have a couple slides to share with you before we get started on version 3 here. So we're really glad that everybody can make it today. And this webinar is also being recorded, which you've probably seen. So if you know people who have not been able to be here, this will be available online for folks too. So one of the exciting things here, let me get my screen arranged, is that SnapPlus version 3 is ready to start using. So the first thing I wanted to do for everybody to see is put on the web address for SnapPlus version 3 here. So everything that you're seeing me do today is something that you can do yourself and log in and try. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, to set up a SnapPlus version 3 account. And I'll talk a little bit about how to do that in a moment when I switch over to SnapPlus version 3. So today I have a CEU scan here in case you need to do that with the QR code. And I'll put this up again at the end of the presentation in case you're here for CEUs today. So SnapPlus version 3, I'm going to switch to my other screen here, is an online application. And I'm going to start by going to the web address. So one of the nice things about SnapPlus version 3 being online is that you are no longer limited to having to use SnapPlus on a Windows computer. So you can use SnapPlus on any device like a Mac or a tablet that has internet access. Although you could feasibly get to SnapPlus on your phone if you wanted to, it's not optimized for mobile at this time. So technically you could log in on your phone. I think it's going to be hard to use some of the screens, but we know in the future that there are certain things that people might like to do on mobile. So for now, we recommend that you use a laptop or a tablet or a desktop computer that has an internet connection to access SnapPlus V3. When you're first going to V3, you'll start out by typing in that web address in your web browser and going there. And before I hit enter here to go to the website, I want to point out that if you would like to bookmark this website to come back to it on your bookmark bar on your computer, the correct address to bookmark is this one that I've typed into the bookmark bar or into the URL bar. So when I hit enter here, one of the things you'll notice is that I'm redirected to this really long URL at the top. And that is part of a security feature, so that's intentional. But if you try to bookmark this in the process of coming back to SnapPlus V3, you're going to get an error. So make sure you're bookmarking that shorter URL that I showed at the beginning. Now, if you do not yet have a SnapPlus version 3 account, they are free. What you need to do is go to the bottom of this box and click this sign up link. And I'll do that now just as a demonstration. So this says sign up with a new account. And what you need to do is enter your email and enter a password. So I don't need to do that today because my account is set up. But if you did, you would go through and do those steps and then click sign up. And you will receive an email to confirm your account. So you'll have to log into your email and confirm your account before you can log in. For today, I'm going back to the sign-in page because I already have a SnapPlus login. And I will log in here with my credentials. And this is what we call the home page of SnapPlus version 3. So on this page, you can see we have some information at the top. And then the main part of this page is a big list of farms. For me, I've done a lot of different testing on the site. So these are all the different plans that I have access to here on the bottom table. I also have some buttons along this middle toolbar that we'll be working with today. I can use the search bar to search through the different plans that I have available and filter my list. I can also filter by group over here. For the training today, we're going to work with SnapPlus V3 in two parts. So the first part, I'll be going through and starting completely fresh, kind of a blank plan, and showing you how we input data on the different screens and build out our nutrient sources and our rotations and generate reports. And then in the second part of the training, what I'll do is show you how you can take an existing SnapPlus V2 database that you might already have saved on your computer and actually upload it into version 3 and get all of that historical data loaded and ready to go without having to input that again. So we have some really nice features to do that and help you get started quickly on plans that already exist. To start today, I'll click on the Add Farm button on the left side here, and I want to create a farm manually, which means I'm got a blank slate here. When I do that, I have to enter a farm name. So I'll pick today's date and click Create Farm. When I do this, you can see what happens is I'm redirected to the farm page, and we see some more menu options appear here at the top. So I can tell which plan I'm working in because it's listed as the name here in the upper left-hand corner. And then these are all my different pages for navigation, similar to SnapPlus version 2. So as I'm going throughout the training today, I'll refer to these links at the top as pages. So we have a fields page and a nutrients page. And then I have some more links down below that are in this white bar, things like crop selection and county selection. I'll usually call those tabs. So we have pages and tabs. And when you click on different pages, like if I click on the field page, you can see my navigation down here in the white bar changes, and I have access to different tabs. So if we go back here to the farm page, I want to point out a couple different things. We have spaces for your annual notes here on the left and the farm narrative on the right. So similar to SnapPlus version 2, you can type text into these boxes, and that is saved for you. If I have data in the plan for multiple years and I want to have annual notes that I'm editing in other years, I would pick a different crop year from my menu up here. For today, we're just starting, so we only have 2025, but in the future, that would be how you get to annual notes and see them for other years. I also have the farm narrative box here, and notice that I do have options to edit the text that's within that box if I wanted to make it bold or italics or anything like that. So I can start typing in my farm narrative and it's automatically saved in that box. The other thing that you'll notice here on my screen is in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there is a last edited line, and it has some information about the time and the user that last edited this plan. That becomes important later in the presentation when we start to talk about farm permissions and how you can give multiple accounts or multiple people access to edit and work on the same plan. The other thing here that is currently hidden is this owner contact information. So this would be the owner operator for this farm. And when I click on this bar, you can see I expanded down some contact information to fill in there for that person. We move on to the crop selection here. This is pretty similar to SnapPlus version 2. What I'm going to do is add some crops and also add some counties today as we go through and I show you how to build out your fields and build out this plan. So I'll click on any crops on this left-hand side that I'd like to add. And one thing I can do is also search by starting to type a crop name, and then I filter my list down to see only those crops that have that name. So it makes my life a little bit easier if I don't want to have to scroll quite so much to get my crops added here. I'll add some cover crops to the plan. You'll notice one thing that's new about SnapPlus version 3 is the way that we deal with cover crops. So I'll make sure to add a couple of those so we can add those to our rotation. And then once I'm done, this is automatically saved and I can move on to county selection, where I have some example fields in both Columbia and Manitowoc County today. After selecting counties, I can go to farm settings, and we have two different settings menus here that I want to point out. In the farm settings, these would be things that apply for all years across the farm. So in my case here, I'll select that I'm using second year manure nitrogen credits. I'll uncheck the soil test P management strategies, And then I'll point out down below that on this page, we do have winter spreading strategies. So winter spreading strategies that you pick on this farm settings page, those are what we assume are the default for all the fields across this plan. So that's a starting point. If you have two spreading strategies, and those are always the ones that you use for spreading in the winter, you can pick those there, and then that will be what's set across all of the fields in this plan. I'll also point out that you have the ability to edit winter spreading strategies on a field by field basis too. So if you pick two strategies here and then you end up needing to select a different strategy for a handful of fields, you can do that on the management page on an individual field basis, and we'll save that information by field. So this is one place to enter those strategies. You have another place on the management page. For crop year settings, those are settings that are saved by crop year, so it's important to note which crop year is selected in the upper left-hand corner. And for today, the only thing I need to change on this page is to select an application rate calculation method, and that will be populated and noted on the 590 checklist. And for now, I'm going to skip the Farm Permissions tab, and we'll come back to that later when we talk about managing data and sharing plans in SnapPlus V3. So before I move on to adding soil tests and field boundaries, I'm just going to check in with the chat and see if there's any questions yet. So far, so good. Okay, we'll keep going here. The next thing I want to show is how to import soil tests and how to import field boundaries into the new version of Maps. So I'm here now on the fields page. And one easy way to start your plan is by importing soil tests so that you're importing all of your field names at that time. So I'll click on the soil test tab and click import. And then I have two options here. Today I'll choose select a file because I already have my soil tests in a spreadsheet. And I have them here in soiltests.csv. So I navigate on my computer to find the soil tests and click open. And then I get a pop-up that shows me what I'm importing here. So on the upper left-hand corner, you can see that I have new fields being added with these soil tests. It's field 1, 2, and 3. And then when I look at this table, I want to point out that I have the option to change the size of these columns so I can make sure all my field names are visible. I can also sort by clicking on the column if I want to review some of my soil sample information. And for today, this import is looking good. If I had any errors or issues to address, I would see those show up in red text inside the specific area where there is a problem. One easy way to check for errors too, if you have a lot of soil samples that you're importing, is to click on this button that says show errors at the top. And then if you do have any issues that need to be resolved, that will sort or filter all the rows to the top that have those problems. For today, this import's ready to go. So what I'll do is I'll click the import button in the lower right-hand corner to bring this soil test data into my plan. So we're still on the soil test tab, but now we can see that I have data populated for 2 different years of soil tests. So that spreadsheet I brought in had some 2024 tests and some 2020 tests. When you're navigating in SnapPlus version 3, one important thing to pay attention to is that the specific row that you have highlighted, in this gray-blue color when you click on it, that often determines what type of information or data or buttons are available to you. So when I click on the 2024 soil test row in this top table, that table is showing the averages, and down below, after that's highlighted, I can see the individual samples that get averaged for that particular field's soil tests. Notice here I have sample ID 1, 2, and 3, but if I click on the 2020 test and highlight that one, the samples that are displayed change, and I see now I have samples A, B, and C. So that same pattern of clicking and highlighting the row that you're working in is something that you'll see across many different tables in SnapPlus version 3. The next place I want to go here is to take a tour of maps and show you how to import field boundaries and draw features and navigate the new maps within SnapPlus version 3. So when I click on the Maps tab here, you see we are brought to the maps right within SnapPlus version 3. And that's one new thing, I would say, one of the biggest changes between SnapPlus version 2 and 3 is that now maps are totally integrated. So that means that there's no longer this like upload and download step of having to remember to bring the changes that you make online back into a database or upload them back to online. Any change that you make within maps is automatically saved back to your plan. So that's one really, really nice thing about not having to keep track of those uploads and downloads and have everything integrated. We just talk about the navigation on this page for a minute. You can see that I have the map of Wisconsin in the middle. I have a panel on the left with two different tabs. Right now we're looking at the layers tab, and that does have my different layers in collapsible menus that I can see which ones are turned on. On the right-hand side, I have some different ways to navigate the map. So we have different search functions in this search box. We can search or zoom to a field once we have fields, or we can change the settings for the search bar by clicking on this gear button, and we can choose to search by address or by township, range, and section. So clicking on a different option here will change the function of the search bar, and you can start to use it to find a specific address or back to jumping to fields. I also have zoom buttons here on the right side, so this allows me to zoom in on the map or zoom out on the map. And this button here is a zoom to current location. So if you happen to be near some of the fields that you're trying to work with, by clicking this button and enabling that location within your browser, Snap Maps will zoom to wherever you are physically located with your machine. On the bottom right-hand corner, this is one more way to navigate, and I'll zoom in a little bit so that makes a little bit more sense. This is a overview map in the bottom right-hand corner, and what it's showing is sort of a zoomed out version of wherever you are on the maps. So you can see here I'm zoomed into this area, and when I look on the bottom right, I can see the broader lay of the land here, and I can actually drag this little rectangle if I know generally where I'm headed within this neighborhood, and I can use that to zoom around quickly within one given spot. For now, I'll click on this arrow to hide the overview map so I have a little bit more space on my screen. And then what we'll do is we'll import some field boundaries so we can actually start seeing what these different features look like in SnapPlus V3. I'll click on import or export a shapefile here to get started, and that's on the left side with these two arrows. And when I do that, I get an option to import and export, and I want to make sure that import is selected to start. And I need to pick a feature type, which is whatever type of shapefile I'm trying to import today. In my case, it's field boundaries, and I happen to know that they were created in Snap Maps because I made them that way, so I'll check that checkbox. If you're bringing in shapefiles from a different mapping application, if you're working in some other GIS, and that's how you created the shapefiles, you would not check this box. I have three options to consider here about the way that I do my field import. One is the overlap check, which is turned on right now, and that means that we're checking for overlapping field boundaries. These second two options, the second one is to merge fields into one multi-polygon for each shapefile. This is specifically for people that are working in GIS applications that output multiple, a given field might be output as multiple shapefiles that should be merged for that field. So you would only want to check this if you know that your shapefiles have that. And then finally, we have an option to overwrite the current Snap Maps data. And this is one to be careful with. So this one right now is gray, which means it's turned off. If I were to turn this on and I already had field boundaries saved to my plan, what would happen is anything that I import here would overwrite those boundaries and delete the existing field boundaries. So sometimes that might be something you want if you're doing a big update and you're bringing in all your new field boundaries from a different GIS. But I suggest you leave that turned off and be careful with it because you can easily delete a lot of data that way if you accidentally overwrite existing boundaries. And when I do that, I need to find on my computer where I've saved my shape files and select them and click open. And then once they've loaded here, I can click import to bring them into Maps. And what we see after we do the upload is we see a message about how many fields were imported and if anything, any errors came up. So in my case, I had two fields that I imported, and we didn't have any issues. But if you did see errors here, down in this white space, you would also get a table, and that table would list out which fields had some issue and some description of what's going on so that you have an idea of how to fix that and get those imported. So for now, we're done importing shapefiles, and what I'll do is click Go to Map to see what it looks like to have some field boundaries here. So these two fields are in Manitowoc County, and I've imported them here as Field 1 and Field 2. If I want to draw a field by hand, what I need to do is navigate to that area on the map, and then we'll open up this Edit tab with the little pencil here. Once we click on Edit, we need to pick the feature type. So I'd like to draw a field boundary. And then I have two options here once I've selected my feature type. I can add a new one, or I see the instruction here to click on an existing field, like Field 1 or Field 2, if I want to edit those. So for today, I'll add an additional field on my map here. And just like version 2, we get a blue dot to start editing, and we click to set our boundaries here. So once we get these set, I'm not being very careful here, I'll just make a quick field. Once I close the boundary, I need to give the field a name. Because I imported soil tests and those soil tests had field names, when I click in this field name box, I can see I get a suggestion drop down for existing field names that don't yet have boundaries. So here I'm getting field 3 because I don't have field 3 drawn yet. I'll select that, and then I do need to click Save in order to save this field. So that's an important point here. In many parts of SnapPlus version 3, you'll notice that we're saving data automatically. When you're drawing or editing features in maps, we do require that you click Save because in some cases, you might still want to fiddle around with some of these field boundaries or make other edits. And so we wait to save until we're sure you're done actually making the changes that you need. So I have 3 fields drawn here. I just want to go back out and talk about some of the other feature types that you can see here for editing in Snap Maps. So if I scroll down, I can see some of these menus have this small triangle symbol. That means that I can click and expand down and see multiple types for this feature. So I have direct conduit to groundwater points and areas. I can also go down and look at different types of dismissed SWCMAs, which we'll look at in a second. And here's another example of different Silurian bedrock layers. So those are all of the feature types. And the other thing I want to point out here, if we go back to the layers menu, is that we can see which layers are turned on here to the left. And one of the things that you might notice is that we see the layer names, but we're not actually seeing any symbols in this case. So we're not seeing what these different symbols look like. If I go in and I turn on my SWCMAs, to see a SWCMA here, it would be nice if I could see the legend so that I knew what some of these different colors meant. And the legend is actually a separate button here on View Map Symbols with the triangle, square, and circle. And we have it set right now by default to filter to show only the specific things that are in your view, only the specific symbols that are in your current map extent. So I can take this legend and I can move it around the screen. I can also collapse that layers and edit panel if I need a little bit more space. And if I wanted to see all of the symbols, not just what's currently on my screen, I can control that with this legend settings, which is the gear menu, and I would uncheck this filter symbols button, and then I can see examples of what all of these different types of features look like. So you will notice that we are seeing different symbols, different colors than in the version 2 Snap Map. So I know sometimes that's getting used to things looking a little bit different, but they are all labeled here and they've been designed to be colorblind friendly, which is a really nice feature of these maps too. So the reason that we changed up and that Cala changed up these colors is that we make it a little bit easier for some folks to see. So I can keep this map symbols open. And I think I'll go back to filtering here. And the next thing I want to show you is how to dismiss a SWCMA. And we'll practice searching by address in the same process. So here I have an example in Columbia County of a bad SWCMA, a pond that is no longer there that I want to show you how to dismiss. So when I want to search for an address, I start typing the address and I'm selected the search for an address setting. And then once I see the right one, I can click on it here. and that will zoom me to a new location on the map. And I'm going to bring my layers back here to make sure that I have everything turned on. And what I want to show you today is an example of a SWICMA here that's near the Arlington Research Station that is showing a pond, and it is not there anymore. So if I zoom to the east here a little bit and navigate out, one little trick you saw me do here on the left with the base map is that sometimes if the tiles that show the aerial imagery are taking a while to load, one way to get them to load faster is to switch which base maps are shown. So the more of these you have turned on, the more things you're loading. So if you're experiencing kind of a slow connection or just feel like you're waiting for a really long time, that's a good option. You can turn off some of these things and it'll load faster for you. So I now am looking over here at this area, and I want to point out what we see is this little black. This is showing as a pond here, and it's got a 1,000-foot SWICMA around it. But if we turn off and actually look at the imagery here, we'll see that it is not, there's not actually a pond there anymore. We can kind of zoom in. So maybe at one point there was something there. Maybe it was a pond, maybe it was a pit, but it's certainly no longer a water body. So what I want to show you how to do, I get that turned back on here, is how do we deal with that situation so that our fields that might be impacted by this SWICMA aren't getting a restriction for a water body that's not actually there. So in this example, I'll draw another field that intersects the SWICMA. And this field will be field 4. And then in this example, because we're editing, we want to stay in the Edit tab and scroll all the way to the bottom to Dismissed SWICMA and select the correct type of SWICMA. So this is a 1,000-foot SWICMA. You can see it's a circular shape. So I'll click that one. And I'll click Add New because I'm dismissing this SWICMA. And this is one area in maps where you don't have to be like precise with your clicking, right? So we don't have to be very specific. We can just make sure that we're getting the area of the SWICMA that overlaps with the field boundary. So I'm just going to draw a big square here. It's not perfectly lined up or anything. And then once I've covered that area, I can click Save, and you'll see what happens is that the dismissal snaps to the area that intersects the SWICMA in the field boundary. So we see this little area has turned gray to indicate that we've dismissed the SWICMA restriction on that field. So you're not actually deleting this water body, but what you are able to do is you're able to dismiss the restriction here so that when you're working on field 4 and making your applications on field 4, you're not getting those flags for this SWICMA because you've dismissed it. But we still show it on the map so that you can see which parts have been dismissed. So that is SWICMA dismissals here. And the final thing that I want to show you before we go on to enter other field data is how to make PDF maps and how to save those maps. So PDF maps, you can do an export by clicking on the PDF symbol at the bottom of this little toolbar. It's this square. And then doing that opens up a pop-up box. And I think one of the really, really convenient things about the way that Cala, our JS developer, has set this up is that you can now zoom and drag right within your export here. So I'm setting my map view by zooming and scrolling and kind of dragging this exactly how I want. And then once I have it positioned, I can pick some other export settings if I want to change the font size for the legend or put the legend on a separate page. I can make those selections. And then when I'm ready to download or export it, I just need to give it a title and click Export Map. And then that will process, and this saves as a PDF map that you'll see is saved directly to your downloads folder on your computer. So once it finishes processing, you'll see it in your downloads, and then you can save it or move it wherever else you need to. So you can see here my computer opened up my test map. This is a PDF document. It's saved in my downloads folder now, but I can save that anywhere else that it makes sense on my computer once I've downloaded it. One other nice tip about this is that once you have exported your map, this box, this pop-up actually stays open. So if you have a few maps to make right in the same area, if you have multiple fields, you can actually just drag and click and reset your map screen right here, give it a new title, and export another map. So that is one way to work pretty quickly here. If you have fields in the same general area, you can just keep exporting maps from the same box. And then when you're done, you can click the X here. All right. So that is maps. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions in the chat. All right, Andrea has a good question here about dismissing SWCMAs. If you dismiss a SWCMA, does it dismiss it for every user, or is it just the individual plan? It is just the individual plan. So that is a feature that is associated with this specific field that you have dismissed the SWCMA on. So if for some reason somebody else had a field that intersected this area that I dismissed, they would have to dismiss the SWCMA themselves. So this is a plan-specific, field-specific dismissal. A related question that came up recently in a training too is, if I have multiple fields, in this area that intersect the same SWCMA that I'm dismissing, can I do one dismissal and cover those multiple fields at the same time? And the answer to that is yes. So if I had a field to the north and a field to the south here that both intersected this SWCMA, I could do one box around those for the dismissal and dismiss those areas. Travis is asking, is there a way to make notes or add text on the maps prior to creating a PDF? Travis, not right now, but doing map annotations is on our list. So I'll let Kala say more on that if she has any more comments in the chat. So that's something that doesn't exist yet, but we know is something that is on our list of requested features. Okay, great. So I think those were my notes on maps here. And I'll just double check to make sure I didn't miss anything for you. Let's head back to the overview page and see what kind of data was populated from the maps. So now that we've drawn field boundaries for these 4 fields, we have information in the fields overview tab about acres, cropping acres, manure spreadable, and winter spreadable acres. The other thing we can see on this overview tab is this is an area where we can create groups and subfarms and assign fields to those 2 different things. So groups and subfarms are similar. They're ways to group together fields. And the main distinction between them is that a field can only be in one subfarm, but a field can be in as many groups as you want. So, different people use groups and subfarms in different ways to organize their plans. I'll do an example subfarm here by clicking on subfarm settings and new subfarm. And we'll call this Bucky's subfarm. And I can see the instructions here that I need to click on rows to add fields to my subfarm. So I would click and highlight field 1 and field 2 in this kind of gray-blue color. And then once I'm done, I'll click Save Changes. So now I can see field 1 and field 2 have been assigned to Bucky's subfarm. And because Bucky's is selected here on the subfarm menu, I'm only seeing those 2 fields. If I want to see everything, I can click back to the subfarm dropdown and say all, and see all 4 fields. The other button that I want to point out here is this Display Inactive Fields toggle. So right now this is gray, which means it's turned off. I don't have any inactive fields in this plan, but if I was importing an existing SnapPlus version 2 database that did have inactive fields, I would need to turn this on to actually see those fields in my list. So this is an option that you have if you want to see or not see those inactive fields. If we go to the Land Attributes tab to see what kind of data is there, we can see we have our fields names again. So we have 1 row per field. And then here we're seeing a lot of different information about the soil and the slope and some additional information that we use when we're calculating soil loss with Russell 2 and when we're calculating the phosphorus index. So this is where we can see all of that information about the fields. One last thing I want to do here before we leave the fields page is go back to soil tests and point out that for field 4, we did not import any soil tests. And I did that because I wanted to show you this use default soil test checkbox and explain a little bit about what that does. So this is intended as an interim soil test. It's mostly a convenience where if you are working on a plan and you're waiting on your soil test results to come back from the lab, you can check this box and then go forward with planning your nutrient applications and your crops on this field. SnapPlus requires some soil test value to be entered in order to do your planning. And so checking this box is one way to get started on the planning before you actually have those soil tests to import. When you're using this, you're going to see you get a warning on the management page as a reminder saying, hey, you're using default soil tests, make sure you import the real ones. But we will let you go ahead and plan the field with these interim values just so that you can get some work done while you wait for those soil tests to come in. As soon as you have any type of soil test imported for this field, even historical ones, then this option to use the default disappears. So it's really only present when you have a field that has no soil tests whatsoever on it, and we need to have some data in there to start planning. The last tab that I want to show here is the Field Restrictions tab. And Field Restrictions is a different way to see, other than maps, what type of restrictions might be present on a given field. So I can select my field in the upper left-hand corner and see, for example, that field 2 has a SWCMA within 300 feet of a stream or river. This data is populated by the map layers. So for the most part, you're really not going to need to be going in here and editing any of this by hand, but it is a nice way to see, just an alternative way to see what types of different restrictions might be relevant or checked for a given field and crop year here. All right. So we'll head on to the nutrients page now. What I'll do is I'm going to show you how to add manure sources and fertilizer sources, and then we'll do a quick demo of grazing and using the livestock tab to estimate manure production. So here on the manure and biosolids tab, I can add a new source with this button at the top with the plus, and then I can enter some basic information about the source, like its name and the type. And then when I do that, I see that I have some information that's populated in these two other tables. So I have a manure quantities table by crop year. I also have manure analysis. So in this case, for the bedded pack, I'll keep the book value. For many sources, SnapPlus does have this book value available in case you don't have a manure analysis. But for my next source, which will be a liquid source, I'll give an example of how you actually enter those manure analysis values. So for my pit source, I would like to enter something other than the book value because I have some manure analysis that I got from the lab. I can do this by clicking the plus button here and filling out some of this information for the manure analysis. For the date, I can choose to type in the date like I did here. And then for the next example, I'll show you how I can use that calendar date picker to pick it with a button. Let's see, I'll get my data typed in here so I can show you a good example of working with this. So that's my first analysis. I can add additional ones here. And you'll notice that I'm entering this in by hand right now. And another thing that we have coming, it's a new button that you don't see here yet, is you will be able to import by spreadsheet too. So if you have several different manure analyses in a spreadsheet, you'll be able to do an upload just like we do for soil tests. So here I'm using the date picker, which is a calendar to select my date. And then I have some additional data to enter in here so that I can show you the feature of how to create an average from multiple analyses right within this section of SnapPlus. So I have two different manure analysis values entered here. And one important thing to note is on the right side here, this use for planning checkbox. The source that has that checked is the analysis that has that checked is the one that we'll be using anytime you make a planned application for this source. So right now, fall 2024 is the analysis that's checked here. If I go and make a Pit 1 application somewhere in one of my fields, this is the data that we'll use when we're calculating the nutrient value of that application. If you wanted to create an average from multiple multiple analyses, we would click the Create an Average button here, and then select the ones that we want to average and click Save Average. And then that gives us a new row that calculates the average values of the two that I selected here at the top. So for today, I think I'll use that average for my planning. And then the last thing I need to do on this page is enter the available annual quantity and any transferred off farm for these two sources. So these are boxes that I can click in and enter the data here. In my case, I want one more 0 on that. I'll say that none is transferred off the farm. And then for my solid source, notice that if I do enter any value here on the right side in the amount transferred off farm, then we do the math to figure out how much manure is remaining that you would need to apply from each of these sources. This table is saved by crop year. So as we add crop years to our plan, we'll be able to see that that information about the annual quantity is saved by year, and you can look at different years. For fertilizers, I have a few standard fertilizers here to add from my list with the plus button. And I would click these to add them to my table. If you'd like to add a custom fertilizer, you can click that here, and you can see then you have a row where you have the option to enter in the different values for your own custom fertilizer here. I'll do a brief example with grazing today. So this grazing feature is brand new, and we hope it's a little bit of an easier way for people who are working on NMPs with grazing to figure out what is the appropriate rate of manure deposition by the grazing animals going out across these different pastures. So as a quick example today, I'm going to make a grazing schedule. So a grazing schedule is a way that we're combining building the herd and then specifying what period of time and where are those animals grazing. So I first have to give it a name here. And then next I need to add animals. So I'll click this Add Animals button and start by selecting the different months that this particular group of animals is grazing. And I can just click on them in this list right one after the other and add them all to my month list. Then I can choose the animal group and specify a number of animals and the time that they spend on pasture. And when I do this, you can see I finished editing that information, and then those heifers were added to my calendar in the months that I selected down below. Once I am satisfied with this schedule, then my next step, if I had my pasture set up already, would be to apply it with this Apply Grazing Schedule button. So we haven't set up our crops yet. We don't have any pasture crops, so we're not going to see any fields here. But I want to pull up this box and just give you an idea of what would happen. I would go in here, and for this particular grazing schedule, what I would want to do is I would pick all of the pastures that this group of heifers is grazing on in 2025 that are being managed in a similar way. So maybe these heifers are going to move across 5 different pastures throughout this crop year. I would want to select all 5 of those from the list. And what SnapPlus is going to do is it's going to look at how many acres do we have across all those pastures, how much manure can we expect that these heifers are producing, and then what is the average rate? We'll calculate the average rate of manure deposited by the grazing animals across all those acres of pastures that you selected. And then what SnapPlus will do is actually add that application for you on the management page, so you don't need to take an extra step of going and writing down the rates and adding it yourself. It's actually connected to this grazing schedule so that if you have to make any changes, that rate will get updated based on the number of animals or the timing that they're out there. I'm going to save nutrient systems for now. We'll come back to that on the management page and just briefly stop over at livestock. So the livestock storage and spreader tabs are they're basically calculators, 3 different ways to estimate manure production if you don't have historical data to give you an idea of what those annual quantities might be. I'll add one example here to the livestock manure production table, and we're in crop year 2025, and I can click Add Livestock, and let's say I'm going to pick my dry cows and say I have 50 of them here, and then I do need to enter the percentage of their manure that's collected and spread as a solid, as a liquid, or if some percentage is deposited grazing or gleaning. So in my case, let's say that half of it, 50%, is collected and spread as solid, and 50% is liquid. And the values that I enter here are used to calculate a total number of tons and a total number of gallons of manure for this specific animal type. And that's added to this row on the table, and it's also added to my farm totals on the top right. So if I add another type of animal here, like dairy lactating cows, and fill in some information about those, say I collect 100% of their manure as a liquid, notice that my farm totals at the top are updated to reflect all the different animals in this list. So this is one way to start to estimate based on the number of animals, how much manure might be available to spread in a given crop year. All right, that's what I have for nutrients. I will now move on to management and show you how to add crops to the fields and also set your rotations. So here on the management page, there's 3 different views that we can take. We'll start in the field view by adding crops to our different fields. One thing that's new about SnapPlus version 3 is that you're selecting a planting season in addition to a crop when you're setting up your crops here. So that is something new that we added because it gives us some flexibility in terms of building out rotations, especially rotations that include cover crops, and not having to rely on those double crops that you're probably used to seeing in SnapPlus V2. So here I've gone ahead and I've added an alfalfa seeding year in 2025 and alfalfa established year in 26. I want to show one option here for speeding up your data entry if you're doing this by hand, which is to click on this duplicate button. And because I have my 2026 established alfalfa highlighted, if I say duplicate to the end of the sequence, I can add another row with the same details as my established alfalfa in the next year. So that gives me these 3 years of crops for this example field. If I go ahead and do my next field, which is field 2, this is a field where I want to show you an example of adding a cover crop and how to use and take advantage of these plant seasons. So I'll start in 2025 with a corn silage crop, and I'll make my selections for that particular crop. And then let's say that after the corn silage comes off the field, I want to plant a cover crop. So in that case, the button that I would like to choose here at the top is actually new crop in the same year. And it's the same year because this table is looking at calendar years. And I know this is a change. We've trained everybody in version 2 that, we're working in crop years. Crop years are still very important, but for the purposes of building your crop sequence, setting it up by calendar year is a way to make this a little bit easier in thinking about when is this crop planted. So my cover crop that follows the corn silage is planted in calendar year 2025. I can pick from some different cover crop options here. So you can see I have a September planted, overwintered, not harvested. I also have an October version, and then there's an August version that's in the crop list. And I have this annual version. So for today, let's pick September and imagine that we're putting in winter rye, and then we'll select a tillage that's used to plant the cover crop. Following the cover crop, I need to think about what my main crop is in 2026. So I'll add a new crop in the next year and select a soybeans crop here. And then again, I'll use my duplicate trick to add corn silage to the end of this sequence. So I'll duplicate to the end of the sequence. When you duplicate, if you had applications already set up for that crop, those will be duplicated too. So here I'm just showing you how to duplicate the crop. Same thing works for applications. I have 2 more fields I want to set up for us today so I can show you some examples of adding nutrient applications and nutrient systems. And right now you're watching me do this all kind of the long way. So we're adding, entering this data and clicking through piece by piece. I will also show you how to get more efficient with this by setting up crop templates in the new revamped version of the rotation wizard. So I have a few more crops to add here. And then in this example, I want to show how to add winter wheat and give you a sense of one of the types of warnings that you might see when you're building a crop rotation in V3 that's a little bit different than version 2. So when I'm adding winter wheat, that would be a new crop in the same year because it gets planted in calendar year 2026 after the soybeans are harvested. And I will click Select Crop. And first I need to pick the right season. So here I was in June. Notice that SnapPlus actually filters the crops that you see in this list based on what you have selected in the previous column. So I was not finding wheat in my list here because winter wheat is not a June planted crop. It's actually a late summer fall planted crop. So when I get the plant season right, I can go back to my list here and see that here's my winter wheat. And I can select that and a yield and a tillage. And when I finish those selections, I get a pop-up here and it says invalid crop sequence. And if we read this message, it says that selecting the crop and tillage here, which is the winter wheat, means that the planting date of the wheat is 2 weeks later than what SnapPlus normally assumes. And the reason that we put up this warning is because behind the scenes, when SnapPlus sets up crops and applications within Russell 2 to calculate soil loss, we have to make some assumptions about generally when things are planted and when they're harvested. And we've set up these crop sequence warnings to appear anytime there seems to be an overlap in when things are expected to be harvested and planted in a field. So right now, this warning is telling us that typically in Russell 2, the way we have it set up, the snap beans are, or the soybeans rather, are harvested sometime in the first week of October, but the winter wheat is supposed to be planted before then. So there's some kind of overlap, and we're asking you to confirm that this sequence was really what you wanted. In this case, if it is, and you are planting the winter wheat, you can tell us to adjust those dates to make it work by clicking Apply Recommended Fix. And when you do that, the warning goes away and your crop information saves, and you're able to add applications and run erosion calculations. I have one more field to set up for us here. This is our pasture. And I wanted to show you one nice new trick when you're adding crops. If you don't have the crop already in your list here, you don't have to go back to that crops page or crops tab. You can go ahead and add it right here from this page without having to leave. So I'll pick a pasture grass seeding and add that to my list and pick all of the relevant details here. I can do the same thing for my established pasture because I did not select that at the beginning today, and pick pasture grass. And then you'll notice for some of the pasture crops, one new thing here is that you select the crop, and then there's a separate drop down for selecting the grazing management strategy. And then you go forward and you select the yield as you would normally. So I've gone through and I've added basically 3 years of crops on my 4 fields. And the next thing I'd like to show you is how to add nutrient applications. So if we head back to field 2, I will first select the crop that I'd like to add applications to. So this is another important example of how the row that you have selected determines some of the different buttons and options that you have. So I want to start by setting up some 2025 applications. I will click on my corn silage row, and then in the upper right-hand corner, click on nutrient applications. And that opens up a panel here to the right side, and we see a number of different things here. At the top, we see a note, an area where we can click and add crop notes for this 2025 corn silage. I have a reminder of my cropping acres for this field. We have a mini map that's showing the field and any layers that you currently have turned on in the maps, so we can see my SWCMA here. We've got your nutrient accounting table in the yellow and white. You can see which soil test is being used for this particular crop here. And then depending on the crop that you have selected, you might see additional options here down below the soil test. So because this is a corn crop, we have MRTN options, and we can also indicate if it's irrigated or drained for the purposes of getting the correct nutrient recommendation. I'll show now how to add the manure and fertilizer application. So with a manure application, I'll click plus new manure, and I'll pick my source and my timing and my method and enter a rate. And just a reminder here that, again, you can change the width of these columns. If your rate is getting cut off because your column is too narrow, you can click and drag with this little triangle, and that makes sure you can see all the data here. I added this application, and you can see one of the things that happened is I'm getting this red flag under More, indicating that this has some sort of issue with this application. And when I open it up, I can see that my message is that I have an unincorporated liquid application on my SWCMA field that exceeds the maximum rate. So whenever you see a symbol here in More, that's an indication that you should open up and read what the message is. And in some cases, if this was an application that already happened, it might be necessary for me to click here and type in some sort of explanation for what's going on. So when you type in an explanation here, it's saved, and then it's also added to the compliance report so that it appears right next to this flag in the compliance report. Let's go ahead and collapse that More area and add a fertilizer application. In this case, I'll do some potash in the spring. And once I've entered some nutrient applications by hand, one nice way to save myself time is to actually save those to a system if I know that I'm going to use that same program across other fields. So in this case, I've got my potash and my liquid fall manure application. If I click Save Applications to System, I get a pop-up where I can name my system. So I'm going to call this CS for corn silage. And then I can click Save. And once I've done that, let's just go back to the nutrients page and see what happened. Now under nutrient systems, I can see that that system I just made, all the details of those applications are now saved as a nutrient system. So if I'd like to use that system again, I can navigate back to the management page and then pick the relevant field. So I think here field 3 has some corn silage. And I can click on corn silage and open up the nutrient applications tab and then apply the system. And here I just have the one system saved, but if I had multiple, I could select from my menu and click apply. And so this is one quick way to add multiple applications with all of their details to a different field without having to enter each piece of data by hand. You'll see as I added applications here, I have some information that updates in my nutrient accounting. How much have I applied? How much am I over under? And then the final thing that I want to show you here is we have not yet actually set our rotations for these fields. So we'd like to set rotations and calculate soil loss and the phosphorus index. So if I head back to field 1, my rotation settings are here at the top, kind of in the middle, just above the crop table. So I need to select a start year and a rotation length. And when I've done that, you can see I get a black box that outlines all around the crops that are within that rotation that I've set. So in this case, it's 3 years, it's alfalfa. And then now that I've set a rotation, I now get this button where I can see I can click on calculate erosion. And I see this loading bar here that tells you, that blue bar across the bottom is telling you that we're running soil loss calculations and the phosphorus index calculation. And then your results appear in this table, this small table on the left that says PI for phosphorus index, soil loss, what's your T or tolerable level, and then SCI is soil conditioning index, and STIR is soil tillage intensity rating. Those are both two items that are coming from our soil loss calculations from Russell 2 and that are relevant in some cases for especially NRCS kind of looks at these numbers. So those are available too for every time you run rotational soil loss and phosphorus index. I'll go ahead and run that on field 2 as another example. So I want to make sure I'm setting my rotations on all of my fields. And in this example, notice that I picked a start and a length. My length is 3 crop years. Notice that I have 4 rows here because I have that cover crop planted in the same crop year as my soybeans. So 3, this is referring to the crop years when we do that. So now we're seeing this outlining, covering 3 full crop years in this case. If I needed to set contour settings on this field, if it was strip cropping or on contour, it would be here. And if I had a filter area, I would select the filter area right here, just down below the rotation settings. So I want to make sure that I have rotations set on all of my fields before I go and run my compliance report so that we can calculate erosion and the phosphorus index for all of these fields. Here on this pasture that we set up, I also want to point out another type of message. So already we've seen an example of when you have a compliance message that's associated with a specific application, that shows up in your application table. If you have a compliance message or even a guidance message that applies to the whole field, it's going to show up here in this upper area. And so this is rather a long one because this is a specific situation that you run into for pastures that are stocked at a specific stocking rate. And it's telling us that we're not required to have soil tests here, and we can just use the default grazing values for the specific grazing case. This is more of a guidance message, but you can also see compliance messages that show up here. If, for example, you've applied too much nitrogen, a 590 nitrogen warning, that would show up here. You have multiple applications that exceed that recommended nitrogen rate. I think one table I'm noticing that I have not shown yet that is important is this available manure table. So when you're in the process of going through your fields and applying manure, you can see the running tally of how much manure you have left for your different sources by opening the available manure table. and you can resize this and move this around as needed. And here what we're seeing is we're seeing the manure sources in our plan, and then this is the quantity that has been applied across these different seasons for the selected crop year, the total applied, and then how much is remaining from each of those sources. And the nice thing about this table is that you can actually leave it open as you're navigating from field to field. So I can scroll through from field 2 to field 3 to field 4. And if I'm making different applications, I can move this around and keep that open and keep track of how much manure is left to spread. I can also customize this table if, for some reason I'm really not worried about the seasonal values and I just want to see the totals. I can click to hide those columns. It makes the table a little bit smaller. And depending on what size screen you're working on, that might make it easier to tuck this little table away as you're making your applications. We've been working in the field view so far. Also would like to show you the annual view. So annual view is a way to see for one crop year, one row for each of our fields. So we have, see, looks like here we go. Just took a second to load. So I'm going to make this field column a little bit bigger. In 2026, I see here that I now have one or multiple rows for each field. Field 2 has 2 rows because we have both the cover crop and the soybean crop in that crop year. And then we see fields 1, 3, and 4. This page has a lot of different columns on it. So this is a big table. You still have the option here to make that a little bit easier to see if there's some things that you don't care about seeing here, like maybe you don't need to see the previous crop information, make this table a little bit easier to work with. And you can still access the nutrient applications tab here. So in this case, if I click on the soybeans or on the alfalfa, you can see I'm able to go down and highlight different crops throughout this crop year and still have access to this application table and be able to add my applications across this year. So that's just another way to work with this. And I think this can be nice if you are trying to distribute the manure that you have available and you want to have this open and have that available manure table open on the side and scroll through a number of different fields. If you have a lot of fields in your plan, also a reminder that you can filter this table by crop. So if I just want to see the alfalfa fields, which there's just one for this particular crop year, I can filter by the crop menu and see only those fields. I also have the option to filter by my subfarm or by group settings here. So if I just look at Bucky's subfarm, then I'm only seeing fields that are assigned to that subfarm in this list. So a lot of different ways to look at this data and kind of customize this table and make it easier to work with. The next thing I want to do here is take a brief look at the template builder. So the template builder is a new name for some of the same features that many of you are used to using in the rotation wizard and the rotation builder. So let's just build an example template so you can see how it works. I will do one that is a corn grain, soybean grain rotation. And as soon as I give it a name, you can see I get a lot more buttons and options here for editing my template. And you'll notice this looks very similar to what we've already worked on, adding crops on our field view. So it's the same table. We start by selecting a plant season, and then we select our crop and our yield and our tillage. And then we add crops in the same way in subsequent years. So I can add a new crop in the next year and select some of those same details. And then I can continue adding crops here until I'm satisfied that I have the right number for this particular template that I want to use. And then in addition to crops, I can open up on the upper right-hand corner for nutrient applications, and I can add nutrient applications to this template too. So if I know that my corn will be getting some solid manure applications in the spring, I can add that here, and that becomes part of the same template and will be used and applied on all of the fields that we select when we're applying this template. Notice that I also have the options to set some of these field practices. So if you are working with a group of fields that's all on contour, you could select that here, and then when you apply this template, that contour setting would be selected across all of those fields. Now that I've built this template, I'll show you an example of how to use it. We'll click this Use Template button. And then here, I'm still looking at just Bucky's subfarm. So I want to click All so that I see all of my fields in this list. And then I'll pick two fields from the list by clicking on them and moving them to the right. And what I'd like to do is add my template. So that means add all of these crops and the application that I set up to the end of the sequence, meaning I'm keeping all of the data that exists on field 2 and 3, all the crops and applications I've entered, and I'm going to add this because this is what I'm planning out for my next 4 years. So I clicked end of sequence, and then I'll click done. And we get a message here. So before you're really done, you have a few different options. You can make the changes if you're feeling confident. You can click apply immediately. You can preview the changes if you want to double check things before they become official. And you can also save a snapshot. So we have snapshots in SnapPlus V3, just like version 2. And that is a way to take a quick snapshot of all of the data in the plan as it currently exists before this template is applied. So if you just clicked on 20 fields and you're getting ready to change data, a lot of data across many different fields, we recommend saving a snapshot. That's a really good idea, just as an insurance policy in case you made a mistake, you picked the wrong year, and you don't want to accidentally overwrite a bunch of data that you're going to have to fix. So you have the option to save a snapshot here by clicking this button before you proceed with any changes that you're making. So what I want to do is show you this preview option. I think this is a really nice new thing that will hopefully give people more confidence when they're using templates and editing across multiple fields. This lets you see for each field that you selected, what will happen if you go ahead and apply this template. So we can see the existing data has these lock icons. So this is the stuff that we had already entered together. And then the new data is down below here, starting in 2028, which was the end of my sequence where I had started those new template crops. If I click on the corn grain, we can see that that nutrient application that I put in the template came along. So that will also be added to the field. And then if I did need to make any one-off changes, so I'm just looking at field 2 right now, and if for some reason I needed to make a one-off change to this template that I was adding, I would do that here, and it would only happen on field 2. And all the other fields that I selected in that previous step would get the original template. So this is a way to go through and review what's going on and convince yourself that you got the sequence right. Everything is as expected. And then once you feel good about it, you can click apply template. And what happens is then we send all of that data to those fields on the management page, and that will be saved along with the applications here. So that's Template Builder. I think one final thing I want to show here, I think I'll pause before we do reports and just look at the chat. And then we have one more section to talk about reports before we have a brief interlude. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. And I think what I'll do is I'll finish up reports for this section. So the reports page is here on the top bar. We can navigate there. And similar to version 2, we have a list of reports. One thing I'll point out right away is that we have consolidated some reports, and we've also changed this number for some reports. So a good example is the 590 checklist. That used to be NM8. It's now NM5. So I know that's kind of different. And if you're a longtime V2 user, you'll have to just pay attention to the report titles because we have done some consolidating and reordering of these reports. Keep in mind that there are also still reports being added here. So if you are not seeing your favorite report or one that you use a lot, it's possible that that's just coming in the next update. To start today, one thing that I want to point out is this brand new farm narrative report. So this is one that we developed in partnership with Andrea, and it was actually specifically to try to help out county reviewers. So a lot of the people that I think are on this call today, we put together this report to try to ease some of the tracking and review that you do, and I'm hoping it can be helpful. So when we generate this farm narrative report, we do have to fill out a few pieces of information at the beginning here, and it is saved by crop year. So the user selects the reason the plan was developed, the type of farm, and then if there are livestock, then we do type in an explanation of manure handling strategies down below, and that can be any text that's typed or copied in from the narrative, and then selecting how manure quantities are estimated. Once you enter this information once for a crop year, we do save it. So if you need to generate this report again after updating in the same crop year, this is all saved. And then I'll click download report. And what I get is I get a Word document that's downloaded to my downloads folder. So you can see that's opened up here on the right side of my browser, and I can click on it to open the report. And this opens up in a Word document. And what we've done with this report is we have summarized and pulled information that appears on a lot of different parts of the plan and tried to bring it together in a way to make reviewing this alongside the 590 checklist an easy way to see generally what's happening on this farm. So the first section is an operation overview, and that is providing some basic information about the farm and the operator and the reason the plan was developed. And then we break down the acres in the plan by county here. So if you're reviewing plans that have fields across multiple counties, notice that we do have it broken down here for each individual county for the purpose of tallying up those NMP acres in your county. If you had typed anything in your farm narrative, that would be showing up here under farm narrative. Same thing for annual notes. And then down below, we get into some information about the fields. So this beginning part is a summary where we get to see the number of fields in the plan and the number of acres. And there's also a note here that we have a table at the end of the document that actually lists out those fields. If there are rented fields in the plan that have the rented checkbox checked, they will be listed in this next section. And then a quick summary of any fields that currently have old soil tests or they're missing soil tests will also show up here. We summarize some basic information about manure management and the livestock on the farm next. And then we see some information about manure quantities that's pulled from that nutrients and manure and biosolids tab. The next few sections here, phosphorus strategy indicates which strategy was checked on the farm settings page. And in our case, that's the phosphorus index. And then for anybody that is working in any of these Silurian counties where the Silurian bedrock performance standard is relevant, you will see a list here of any fields that fall in that area. So today we're not working in the Silurian bedrock area. This is empty for me. But if you did have fields that fell in one of those affected counties, then they would be listed here as additional information. We have a general crop summary here for acres of these different crops. And at the very bottom, we have a table of fields that all 4 fields on this farm that I've been working on, I had selected as they were owned by that owner operator. So they're listed in a table here. If I had checked that any of these fields were rented, I would have a separate table showing the rented fields and the tax parcel IDs for the purposes of tracking for those people that own those rented fields, that this NMP is including those fields and which ones they are listed here in the document. All right. Fallon asks, is there a way to distinguish the depth to bedrock for the Silurian areas? Yes, so I think you're asking about, you want to see that listed out by fields that have 0 to 2, fields that have 2 to 5. This right now, Fallon will just list the field boundaries, but we're going to have a separate Silurian report that does exactly what you're talking about, that distinguishes the number of acres for each field that have bedrock depth in those different categories. So I think that'll be kind of a nice way to see what you're talking about. Yeah, definitely. All right, that is the 590 farm narrative. I will click out of that here and show you a couple more reports. So that one is brand new. We still have the NM2 compliance check. So I'll just run it for 1 year today since we don't have very much going on in this plan. I'm selecting a PDF format to start, and I have also have the option to do Excel. So I'll show you PDF now, and we'll look at another report for the Excel version. And so here you can see what's happening is it's calculating erosion, and I get a progress bar here along the bottom. And then once we finish calculating, we're seeing a preview of the PDF here in the browser window. So this is my NM2 report. And if I zoom in, I can see the different messages. So I have a couple SWCMA messages here. Looks like I forgot to set my rotation on field 1, so I'm getting an issue there. And then I've got soil loss exceeding T on field 3. So this is where you'll see those messages. But a reminder that what I'm looking at here is just a preview of the PDF. So I know what people tend to do with this compliance report is you run it, you fix some of the issues, you run it again. Once you're happy with the report and you're ready to download, you do need to go to the upper right-hand corner and click this download button. And what that will do is open up a pop-up on your screen and it'll let you save this report somewhere on your computer that makes sense. So I would need to navigate on my computer to figure out and save this report. Let's look next. Let's do maybe the soil test summary as a good example of a spreadsheet report. I'll do the short version and pick the Excel format. And when I generate Excel report, I don't see a preview. So that just downloads an Excel document to my downloads folder. And I can click on that to open it. And my Excel sheet is opening here, and I see that I did get a couple questions. Sean is asking, since I used default soil test values, shouldn't there be a note in the narrative that you need updated soil test and the compliance report? Yes, sharp, good eye, Sean. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because that was a pasture field that was grazed, there is an exception for grazed pastures that receive no mechanical fertilizer or mechanical manure applications, that they are not required to have soil tests as long as they're stocked at under 1 animal unit per acre during the grazing season. So that's like I know like a very specific exception, but if that had been a regular sort of a grain cropped field, if I had had the corn on it and put on mechanical manure and fertilizer applications, I would absolutely get a compliance message, and there would be a note in the NM2 report, which is the compliance report, and there would also be that field listed in the NM1, that new narrative that you saw. So you're absolutely correct, and it's only because of that specific like grazed pasture situation that that wasn't flagging for a compliance problem, because it's technically in compliance as a grazed pasture. So now I am looking at this Excel document, and I'll bring up again that default soil test just as a reminder. So the default soil test is being applied to field 4. It doesn't count as a real soil test, so we're not seeing it show up here on the soil test summary. It's just an interim value that SnapPlus is using to allow you to continue working. But because it's not a real soil test value that you imported, you're not going to see it show up here as a soil test in the FM6 report. All right. So this is a good time for us to pause. And let's see. I have one question here. The farmer report is printed from your downloaded report. John, can you say a little bit more about what you mean by the farmer report? I might just be missing the, you certainly can print from your downloaded report if you want to print a hard copy of the report. But I wonder if you're referring to a specific report here that I haven't opened yet. So let me know in the chat, and I'm happy to answer that if there's a specific report you're thinking of, or if you're asking more generally about printing. All right. Great, this is a good time to pause. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know we have Ricardo here to say a few things from the Nature Conservancy, and then I will get back with the next part of the training.
Thank you, Hava. All right, Ricardo, if you are ready, are you able to share your screen?
Yes, folks, I'm ready. Let me get it ready here for you guys. Let's see. All right, can you see it, Andrea?
My computer, there it goes. Looks great.
All right. All right, just take a few seconds, I guess. All right, folks, just want to say a few words. I wanted to introduce myself. First off, thank you, Andrea, for the opportunity to be here today with you all. My name is Ricardo Costa. I am the Associate Director of Ag Strategies at the Nature Conservancy here in Wisconsin. I was looking at the list, and I think I know a bunch of you guys, but I just wanted to introduce a little bit of the work we are doing now, specifically with farmer advisors, and almost like a call for help, right? We wanted to work more closely with farmer advisors moving forward. So I have a short presentation, but then just looking for you guys to help us to connect with those out there. So to begin with, I don't know if you know, but TNC is very famous like for pretty much like buying land and protecting land. We have been doing that for the past 50 to 70 years, but we do realize that takes time and money, right? So we have a goal for 2030 for 2030 where we wanted to enhance 50% of the row crop acres in North America. So that takes a lot of money if you're just buying the land. So we are realize we need to work with farmers. And then one way that we are doing that, folks, is through the support of farmer advisors. We realize that we are a small team. We are only 3 people here at the chapter. There is no way we can do the work we are planning to without the support of partners. So if you look on your PowerPoint, out of all the strategies, there is one highlighted there that is actually farmer advisors and service providers. So that's where we wanted to highlight the work today and ask for your help to support us in that strategy. So as I recap, there are over 12,000 CCAs across the country. About 30% of them provide service to over 40,000 acres. So we already can see now that, well, one farm advisor can actually help us with our work and our goal to enhance 50% of the row crop acres in North America. So it's just a fact that CCAs or farm advisors, they do play a very important role in increasing the pace and scale of adoption of conservation practice. So that's what we want to tap in on. We did a few surveys a few years ago with CCAs, right, farm advisors, and we learned that actually when it comes to preferred topics, they do wanted to learn more about cover crops. They wanted to learn more about crop rotations, conservation tillage. So you can see there is actually a good interest from the CCAs in order to actually to learn more about conservation practice as a whole. We also learned that when they look for a source of information, CCAs, farm advisors are very focused on learning from the industry, university, also like from professional colleagues, conferences as well. And then how they wanted to learn is through like a state provide trainings like this one or conferences. So that's how they are learning. I'm showing this graph because we also matched that survey with another survey we did with about 1,200 farmers, where we asked them, which of the following sources do you typically use for information about cover crops, right? So we asked for them to check out that apply. And then we just use cover crops, but think about conservation practice as a whole. Farmers in general, they're gonna be trying on their own. They're gonna rely on other farmers, but they rely on extension as well. But when you look for CCAs or industry or retailer, about only 20% of them said that they get their help from the CCAs. So that shows us. And now, what's the opportunity? So we see also when we ask the farmers, what's the retailer role when the farmer is adopting conservation? So about 90% of the farmers say that they just help if asked for it, or they don't even ask for help, right? So the farmers are kind of doing that on their own. So, but the interesting part is about 40% of the farmers would adopt a conservation practice that was suggested by the retailer co-op. So think about a bunch of the CCAs or farm advisors are hired under co-op, right? We know they wanted to learn more about conservation. They're interested in that topic, but they're still not providing their farmers with the information, even though it looks like the farmers are pretty open for that idea. So that's what we wanted to start talking about with CCAs, with folks who work in farmers directly, that there is a gap here that looks like there is an opportunity for us to try to connect with CCAs uh, and try to provide all the tools we have to support them so they can be the ones talking to the farmers about implementing conservation practice. How is TNC supporting the farm advisor, right? So I know there's a busy slide here, but overall we are doing that in four different ways. We are coming to meetings, right? We are talking to people about the work that TNC does, as you can see here. We have what we call de-risking new business opportunities. I'm going to tell you more about on the next PowerPoint. We also have doing some sort of increasing equipment and infrastructure through cost share. And also we are doing working training and workforce development. So how does that look like, right? When it comes to our building awareness, we are supporting the CCA board with training and educations. We also are supporting them when it comes to developing new new actually certifications as well. That TNC is helping with that. We have a few projects across North America. We are supporting uh, retailers, co-ops to buy equipment so that can be shared across their farmers. So TNC is supporting about 20 to 30% of the cost. So like no-till drill, for example, and then that can be shared with the farmers at cost, but cheaper with their farmers. We also, when I talk about de-risking new business opportunities, we had a project with Growers Edge where farmers they get compensated if they implement cover crops and the yield is less than it was supposed to be with without the cover crop. So that's another example of what we are doing. And then of course training workforce development, like I mentioned, also helping with the CCA specialties, but also supporting trainings like this one that Andrea is given with the SnapPlus team. So that's what we are doing. And to me, that's it. I want to show you guys we are trying to connect more with CCAs, with farm advisors, but we also would like your help. I know you guys are mostly working the county, but working also with CCAs. I just want you guys to think about the CCAs is a very important piece when it comes for us to expand uh, the acres of conservation in Wisconsin. They might have the power that we don't have working nonprofit, and sometimes even working for the county as well. Final part of the work is maybe Dan can step in soon, but we are also working on a project in partnership with University of Extension and Microfields that's called the Wisconsin Cover Crop Data Network. So as you can see, each of those little pins here are areas where we have a farmer that's filling up a survey and submitting a sample of their fall and spring cover crop. You can see we are doing pretty well on the east side of the state, west side, but there's so there is a gap here in the central area of the state. So we are looking for new farmers to join that. So one of the benefits is the farmer will fill out a survey, will get compensated $100 for doing the work, but also the sample that they send, the cover crop sample for the fall and spring, they're gonna get the results back for them as well. The idea is, like the name says, a network. So we wanted to get to a point where farmers, so let's say in Sheboygan County, they wanted to start doing cover crops, and they can go to the website and look, hey, I know that I have some neighbors doing which species are they planting, which rates, what's working, what's not working. So if you have any farmers specifically in that central sense area here that you think would be a good candidate. They just need to plant cover crops, be willing to fill out a survey, and also be willing to send us uh, their samples that we're going to pay for it. Uh, Please send them my way or Dan. We are looking for new farmers. And then on that same note, part of that work, we just create a cover crop tool that is a scenario like where if the farm is looking for a specific goal uh, for nitrogen fixation, for example. So they can go on that tool. There's a QR code on the screen if you want to check, where they can use, and the tool will tell them which cover crop would work best. So this tool is still in development. So another call for help we'd like to have is if you guys would take the time to look at that tool and tell us what's working or not working, because we wanted that tool specifically to be useful for farmers and CCAs and folks in the county that is helping the farmers when they want to implement cover crops. So it's still in development. There is a lot to be changed, but if you can take a look and tell us, hey, it's not working there. So there's an email on the top where you can send your feedback regarding that tool specifically. With that, folks, then I don't know if you have anything to add on the cover crop side. I'm very happy to be here today. Feel free to reach out if you have any thoughts or just wanted to connect. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ricardo. I'm just briefly looking at the chat, and I am not seeing any specific questions for you. But if any questions do come through, Ricardo, and you're not on the call here, I'll be sure to follow up with you and share those with you.
Thank you guys so much. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you, Andrea. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. All right, Hava, we're going to turn it back over to you to wrap up and demo what it looks like to convert V2 databases into V3.
Super. Okay. Wonderful. Let me get my screen shared. You know, as during the break, I was looking at my notes and I actually thought of a couple more things I wanted to talk to you all about that are that I have a good example set up here. So I'm hopefully my screen is now showing up. Okay.
Looks great, Hava.
Okay, great. Super. So a few more things here that I think people will start to get tuned into with version 3 that I forgot to mention that I just want to make sure I flag for people. One new thing that I think you might start to notice is that, and I have an example here because I think it's easier to see an example. So you might remember that in SnapPlus version 2, for nitrogen, there is this sort of 10-pound, I would say 10-pound kind of buffer where if people were just a few pounds over on nitrogen, it wasn't going to flag you. So you could be like up to 10 pounds over on your over for the N without getting a compliance flag. In version 3, you're going to get flagged as soon as you go over. So I've got kind of an example here where now I'm under by 4 pounds here. And I'm just going to increase so that I kind of sneak over. Oh, and I must be not getting my warning here for a different reason. Hold on, I got a different example here for you. That's a bad example. Okay, here's my corn. So I'm going to do this example with corn as MRTN because I wasn't getting flagged there for wheat. So the example that I want to give is here you can see that with corn, it's an MRTN. So I've got the middle of the MRTN recommended range here at 165. So when I'm applying nitrogen, I might I might be over here and not get flagged until I go over the highest aspect or the highest amount in that MRTN range. So if I'm at 165 for my MRTN range for my corn, then there's this range, which is I can apply from 155 to 180. SnapPlus is going to flag for nitrogen over application once you get over 180 here. So that's one of the things I want to show because I know we've gotten questions on this in the past about how this works. It used to be that you got an extra 10-pound kind of buffer up above beyond 180 before SnapPlus would flag. And that's the main point that I wanted to make today. So if I put on, get myself above 180 here, that was too much. I just want to show you that you're going to get flagged right away there and not have that additional 10-pound sort of allowance. So I'm just going to try to sneak down to where we would see that. So I think the reason that this becomes important is that as soon as sometimes when people are going to be uploading their plans, you might start to see red flags with, people were kind of used to crops being able to go that like 10 pounds over, and SnapPlus is going to start flagging for that in these cases. So that's the example that I wanted to give on that. And then another piece that I realized I didn't point out in reports is that this field parcel summary. So I know some counties rely on being able to export a text file with the parcel data for the different fields that are in a given NMP. And that is now here on the reports page under the map section. And I am opening up the text file here on the other side that I'll show you. And that is in the same format that it has been for the counties that use this text file. So it's the same as in version 2. It's just that you're no longer getting to it on the maps page. You're actually doing it right here on the reports page. And then the final thing I wanted to point out that is something a little bit more specific about the way that you set rotations here in SnapPlus V3. So one thing that you could get away with in version 2 and you wouldn't get a warning about it is it was possible to set a rotation that did not include an alfalfa seeding. And in version 3, we require that when you're defining your rotation start and length, that alfalfa seeding be included in the rotation. Otherwise, it won't let you set that as a valid rotation. So that is a requirement that will be enforced. And I think that's going to come up for a lot of people when they're importing their plans, which is our next step, because this is something that we saw in version 2 plans. And I think sometimes it was just a mistake where people would have a couple years of corn silage and then they would go right to established alfalfa without a seeding year in between. And so there will be one of those invalid crop sequence warnings in version 3 when you do that. when you have alfalfa established without a seeding year. And we've set it up in the application so that if you're just working on any given field, like let's go to field 2 here, and we'll delete the wheat and look at the corn silage. So if I want to add a new crop in the next year, I don't even get established as an option here. So we've sort of engineered this where if you're starting in version 3, it's not possible to set up an established perennial crop like alfalfa or pasture before you seed it. So the seeding is required. But when you have conversions and uploads of existing version 2 databases, because this was something that version 2 let you do, we bring in the data, but then we flag it to say, hey, you have to make sure that you have an alfalfa seeding before it's an established crop here. Okay, those were my quick pieces that I wanted to talk about here with a couple examples. And we'll head out of that plan. And the next thing that I want to show you is an example of how we can take an existing SnapPlus version 2 database and import it into version 3. So I will click import, I will click add farm and import SnapPlus 2 farm here. And when I do that, I will get a pop-up here on my screen that shows me a folder, and I can pick an existing Snap database. That would be your SnapDB file. And then when I click open, what's happening here is I have a progress bar, and SnapPlus is translating or converting all of the data in that version 2 database and adding it to version 3. And a really important point here is that doing this does not in any way change that existing database on your computer. So if you were just kind of testing this out and you have some existing SnapPlus plans on your computer, you can upload them and it's not going to change or delete anything about your version 2 desktop data. So you can still open that and work with it. It's not going away. This is just a way for us to copy and translate all of that data so that you can get all that historical stuff into version 3 without having to re-enter it. So my upload completed, and I had a new farm here, this demo dairy that was added to my list. And if I click on that, I can open up that plan. And what I'll do is go to the fields page just to demonstrate to you that in that upload process, I got all 21 of my fields here. This happens to be in Greene County. And if I go to the management page, I can see that all of my historical crop data came along. And I can open this up and see that I also have my applications, and I have information about my field boundaries that came along. So because that database had map information saved to it, I also got all of that spatial data, and those are all uploaded and ready to go. Other things that come along with an import, if you had rotations saved in the old rotation builder and rotation wizard, those are translated into version 3 rotations, or templates rather, in the template builder. And same thing for nutrient systems. If you had nutrient systems set up in version 2, those are uploaded too. So we upload all of your data from that existing plan and bring it into version 3. And then you can start working with it right away for the next year that you want to plan. So in this example, what I'll do is I want to show you a new feature for annual updates that's in this records and updates page. And to do that, I need to add another fertilizer to my list so I can show you one good example of a way to do annual updates using the nutrient systems and template builders to make it more efficient. So I just added map to my list, and the next thing I want to do is add a new nutrient system that uses that map so that I can apply that as part of my annual update. So this is set up for what I'll explain in the next step, where I've got a nutrient system saved, and then I'll go to the records and updates page and go to, we have 4 tabs here. I'm focusing on these middle 2 today, but I'll just point out that application records, or for CAPO's daily log is what this would be called. That's where you're importing records of applications. And then Lyme applications is where you enter Lyme applications. So we won't spend much time on those today. They're very similar to the version 2, but these update crops and update applications tabs are new. So I want to look at those together. These are tabs that are designed to allow you to work with 1 year at a time and make your annual updates and be a little bit more efficient about it. So for update crops, that's where we would want to start by selecting the crop year. And then we get a table that looks a lot like the annual view on the management page that's showing us each crop on all of the fields in this crop year. So one nice way to work with this table is to use the filtering functions to filter by different crops. So let's say that, for example, we had field 9 and field 6 that were planned for corn grain baled stalks in 2024. But maybe we need to update this because we actually took that as corn for silage. One way to do that is to do it by hand. So you can see here, I'm just clicking through and I'm changing the options by hand so that I can see that these are now updated to corn silage. And that data is saved back to the management page, and we would see the corn silage for 2024 on field 9 and field 6. So I can move through, and if I have other things to update here, I can sort this table by tillage, I can sort it by crop, or I can use any of these filtering options to reduce the number of rows that I'm working with if there are other things that I want to target and update. Once I'm satisfied that all of my crops are updated, I click confirm to indicate that I'm confirming that this was all my actual data for 2024, and that just checks all of these boxes here off to the right side. Once I've confirmed my crops, I can move to update applications, and I'm still in crop year 2024. And here again, I'll choose a filter from this upper menu. I think I'll filter to my DAP applications so I can see just the DAP source applications for that year. And in this example, let's say that I didn't end up putting down any DAP. I actually got MAP that year, and I want to update that. One quick way to do that is to use this replace with nutrient system, and I can replace the displayed rows, which means all 4 of these rows, with a system that I've already built. So let's say that I want to replace all 4 DAP applications across those fields with MAP, because that's what I actually spread. So I select my system from the dropdown and click Apply System. And when I do that, all of the details for those applications are updated according to DAP. Those 4 are checked as applied. And if I take away the filter by clicking this X, I can go through and make any other edits that I need to make to other applications across all of these fields. And then once I'm done, I can click confirm. And that means that all of these applications will now be marked as applied on the management page. And we can go and take a look at what that looks like in 2024. I think field 5 is a good example that when we have applied applications here on the right side, so I'm in 2024, I've selected that row. If I open up the nutrients panel, you can see that these 4 applications all have the applied checkbox now, and that's because I had confirmed them on that update applications page. And that means that when I click in here, I'm not able to edit these application details until I uncheck applied. So we assume that when you've checked applied, you've confirmed those details, but you can unlock if you find an error by unchecking this box and then correct the error in those applied applications. All right, the final piece that I want to talk about today before I open it up for questions is one that we had skipped over earlier related to farm permissions. And this is a big one because it's a big change with SnapPlus version 3 being online. That means that when you want to make your plan available to somebody else to look at or to edit, you need a way to do that in this new online platform. And the way that we're doing that is through this ability to add individual users or groups of users on the Farm Permissions tab. So here I'm on the farm page in farm permissions for this demo dairy that I've been working on. And right now in this first table, the only user is me. So this is my email. I am listed as the primary admin. So primary admin is one of the different types of users that we have available in SnapPlus version 3. And if I add a user, so if I add Kala here with her email address, I can select from this drop-down menu of permissions. There's 5 different levels. So I'm currently the primary admin, and there can only be one. So primary admin is the person with the sort of the most power in this situation. They're the only ones who can delete a plan permanently. They're the only ones who can also copy a plan. So those are 2 special things that only that person who's the primary admin can actually do. The next level down would be admin. And so that's a user who is able to edit the plan and also to add other users, planners and read-only users. but they don't have that ability to delete the plan or to copy the plan. Planners are users who have editing abilities, so they can open the plan, they can add crops, they can edit applications, but they can't actually add other users. And then read-only, there's two different versions of read-only, one that includes the maps and one that does not include the maps. And that's simply a viewing permission. So that person will be able to open up the plan and click across the different pages. They can generate reports, they can look at things, but they can't actually edit any of the data. So they can't change any application rates or upload soil tests or do anything like that. So you would select for each user that you add what type of permission you would like them to have. And then once you do that, they get an invitation that's sent to their version 3 account, and it shows up in the upper right-hand corner with this little red message here that you can see I have a few different invitations here in my list. So they have to click the checkbox to accept the invitation before that specific plan or farm would show up on their homepage. So that's how you would add individual users here. I think another thing that's relevant, especially to LCD staff in this webinar, is this idea of user groups and managing permissions as a user group. And I want to start with an example here of a user group that I've set up. And to access that, we'll go to the gear menu and to user groups. And then I have a county NMP group here on the left-hand side. So this has opened up a pop-up window where I can see any user groups that I've already created with this account, and I can also add a new one. So I made this county NMP example group, and the first table we see is the members of the group. So I'm Bucky Badger in this case, so I'm the group admin. And then I have 3 other people in my group who are members of the SnapPlus team and also members of my imaginary county NMP group here. So those are people that are part of my user group. And then what you can see down below is that there are a number of different plans that have been shared with my user group. So I can see these 4 examples here. And in this case, what this means is that myself and Anthony and Dan and Kala, we're all in a user group together, and we all have access to these 4 plans at these different levels of access that are here in this table. So one of the nice ways, I mean, I'm thinking about examples where you have a group of people at a county office and maybe they're all responsible for reviewing NMPs together. So you're often, you're looking at different plans and it's helpful to know who has access to what. And user groups are a nice way to do that because you don't need to worry about multiple users getting added to the same plan. You can simply have the plan shared with the group, and then everybody who's currently a member of the group has access. And in this case, if you are the office manager or team leader, this is also a really easy way where if you have a new employee come on board and you need them to have access to the data, you can add a user to the group, and then they would already have access to all of the farms in this list. On the flip side, if you have somebody leave your office and take another job, removing them from the group is an easy way to remove their access to all of these plans without having to open up each individual plan and remove an individual user from every single one. So I know county offices, you're processing hundreds and hundreds of these plans in some cases. And so if you have cases where you are helping farms with plans or reviewing plans, this can be one really nice way to work together as a group and be able to manage access that way. Once the group has been created, this group ID number is important. That's something that SnapPlus creates, so it's just a unique number. And that's a number that you'll need to copy in order to have a plan or a farm shared with you. So that number can be copied by clicking on it. And then if you are the plan writer and you want to share with a group, you put that group ID number here on the Farm Permissions tab and select a permission level just like you would for any other invite, and then invite the group. And then once you do that, you can see that we have the name of the group here, we have a contact email, and then we have the level of permission. So in this case, the county NMP group has read-only permission to my demo dairy plan. So that means that they can come in and view the plan, open up the maps, look at the different pages, and also download reports and spatial data from the plan as a read-only user. All right, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions on permissions. Now there's a lot, this is new and there's a lot going on, so happy to take questions or we can entertain some different scenarios for how this might work for you. See, I'm just getting my chat open here. Okay. All right, Andrea's covered some of these. Laura's asking, will we also get an email when someone shares one? No, you will not get an email to your email address. You'll have to open up your version 3. You'll have to log into your version 3 account. So the invite only appears here in this account. There's not a push notification to your email. All right. And then some questions that I see Andrea is addressing about uploading and using version 2 and version 3. What is the best way for farmers to send us the reports that are needed to certify them in FPP? So there's two ways to address that, depending on what your office, what your county office sets up. I could see one way to do it would be to download the relevant reports, and then those can be emailed to your county office. The other way would be if the plan writer gives somebody at the county read-only access, the county can actually generate those reports. And then so you can go in, and if somebody has read-only access, you're able to go in and generate reports and set the year range and download that information. So that depends a little bit on what process your office uses for review and what you need in that case, but it could be a situation of a plan being shared with the county or just with the reports being downloaded and submitted via email. Let's see, another question is, in V2 there were phosphorus and total suspended sediment estimated runoff reports. Yes, those are, we built those and they're just undergoing final testing, so you'll see those links show up in the next month or so. So those are sticking around. They did not change, the format did not change, same data, and those are just going through final review. Same thing with some of the CAFO reports. So if you're in here and looking at CAFO plans, we're doing the final review on the CAFO reports, and those are coming in the next month too.
I'll ask a
Yeah.
question because I know people ask me this all the time. If they were to receive view-only access for a database as like a
Mhm.
submittal,
Mhm.
are they still able to look at the maps and potentially export shapefiles? And then a follow-up to that is for people that have Transcendent, are they able to access the field parcel summary text file?
Yes, yes. So field parcel summary, we're actually looking at it right here on this page. So the bottom here, field parcel summary for Transcendent, that's this report. So we would click on reports, field parcel summary, and download. And we did an example of that earlier, and I have the text file open. So yeah, it looks the same. It's just a text file. There's not a lot going on there, but this is the same kind of format that you would have gotten out of version 2. In version 2, you did it in Snap Maps. Here it's on the reports page. The other part of Andrea's question was, if you have read-only access, can you export shape files and can you see maps? As long as you have read-only access and it's not read-only no maps, then the answer is yes. So read-only allows you to see the maps and to export shape files. If you have read-only no maps, then you can't access anything in that maps tab. So that would be, you'd be unable to get at the maps if you had this permission level. So as long as you have a permission level that allows viewing the maps, yes, you can download that stuff. I see John had a follow-up question here about using V3 to report what we've written in V2. Yes, so I think so the import, you can import a V2 plan to V3 and then run reports in V3, but one thing to know is that version 3 is updated, for example, with things like the Silurian compliance and some of the things that I've mentioned that are slight changes from version 2. So depending on your plan, if you upload it into version 3, there might be things that you need to fix in version 3 before you can actually run those reports. So I think Andrea had put in the chat explaining that we're in this transitional period right now where people can start to use version 3, but version 2 is not yet retired. So you're still able to generate those reports. And just keeping in mind that one of the things that's really going to determine how long version 2 is still usable is when the 590 standard is updated, and when those rules are implemented into SnapPlus version 3, we will no longer be updating version 2. So version 2 at that point, when the rules change and the 590 standard changes, will no longer be up to date for all those aspects of 590 compliance.
And just to follow up on that, you will perpetually be able to take V2 databases and upload and convert them in V3. That isn't just a feature to kind of get us by
Mhm.
for a while. It's
Right.
built, it will
Yes,
remain
because
there
we know that
forever.
that's true. And we know that, in many cases, folks have files on their computer with a lot of different plans. And, maybe it's true that you write a few plans in version 3 this year because you're getting used to it. And then next year you upload some of your other plans and you do it all in version 3, right? So that's absolutely true, what Andrea said. All right. So I think if no more questions on permissions, I just want to say a few more things about managing snapshots and copying farms and archives. So let's head back to the farm overview page here. Because I'm the primary admin on this plan, I have a copy farm button. And what this copy farm button does, if I click it, is it actually makes a complete copy of my database when I click that button, and it adds it as a totally separate plan on my home page. So here I have demo dairy from today, and then I have a copy of demo dairy from today. The really important thing to know is that these two things are now totally separate. So if I make changes to my copy of demo dairy, they are not reflected on demo dairy. So if you ever had a reason to have a totally separate copy of a plan, that's one way to do it. But I want to emphasize that this is probably not the best way to to do something like saving for long-term storage for a version of a plan. We actually have a different way to do that called archives. So I want to talk about archives now. Archives are a new feature that I want to show you in my slide deck because the buttons are not yet on version 3. We're still finishing those. So archived plans. Let me show you a little bit about this. So the idea of an archive plan is this is a way that we can address the need for knowing and having versions of your plan that are saved at different points in time that you might need to go back to and reference or generate reports. So one example could be that when you've been using SnapPlus V3 for a few years, you might want to complete your plan for the next year and generate your reports, and then archive a version of that plan at that point. So the point at which you generated all those reports, and you know that I generated my reports from this version of the plan, send them into the county. And then in the process of the county, maybe, county staff reviewing those plans, there might be other updates as we move into the spring months and that active version of the plan is being updated. We know that we have a record of what was actually submitted and what state the plan was in when it was submitted to the county or to another agency. If for some reason we needed to go back and generate more reports from that version of the plan, so if you had to correct something and maybe change a setting on one of the reports, you could get back to that specific version of the plan that you had submitted with all those reports by going to your archive and viewing it and generating more reports. So what we envision is as the years go on and people have multiple years that they have used SnapPlus V3 to submit different NMPs or different permit requests, archiving is the way to save those different versions that you might need to reference. And if you needed to amend an archive, you can also do that and open up the archived version and make changes to that and save that update, all without affecting what we think of as your active plan or your working plan, where you might have maybe there's changes in progress or you're updating some applications throughout the season, and that is separate from these archives, which are saved at a certain point in time. So this is the solution to having some sort of longer term version and data storage in SnapPlus V3. The other thing that we have that I talked about briefly that is maybe related but has a different use is a snapshot. So snapshot is a way to take a copy of the data for this plan at this specific point in time And it's basically intended to be used as a giant undo button. So if you're about to make a bunch of changes and you want to take a snapshot, that's a really easy way for you to know that you have a way to go back to how your plan was in the morning. If by the time you finish your edits in the afternoon, you find that things have gone wrong and you just want to go back. So taking a snapshot is a nice solution because it keeps the snapshot associated with this specific plan. So keep in mind that when you copy, the copy becomes a totally separate list, item in that list on your homepage. It's a separate plan. When you take a snapshot, all of those snapshots stay associated with your plan that you snapshotted, and you can choose them here from the menu. And because snapshots are not intended to be long-term data storage, we only give you 5 of them per plan. So I could take 5 different snapshots of my demo dairy, and I could, go back and revert back to a snapshot. But once I try to take a 6th, then we'll just start replacing them in chronological order. So we did that because, again, the snapshot feature is really just intended to be kind of an oops button for cases where you found a big error and you want to revert back to the way that data was when you last snapshotted. So that's the intended use of the snapshot button. For any more longer term data storage, it would be using that archive feature that we looked at. All right, I have a couple more comments about how things convert in SnapPlus version 3. So I'll head back to my slides for that. So we did one example here of importing and converting a version 2 database. And I just have a couple brief comments about other things that you might see when you're importing or working with importing or converted plans. The first comment pertains mostly to CAFO plans, so I'll talk briefly on that. And then I have a few other illustrations of situations related to crops and rotations and manure sources. So 2 things to be aware of with converted CAFO plans. You might notice a difference in winter manure spreadable acres and manure spreadable acres for 2 specific reasons that I'm outlining here. So in SnapPlus V2, you might be familiar with this pink layer of winter restrictions, 6 to 12% slope. And what we did in version 2 with those pink areas when you had them in the field is we removed those acres from the winter manure spreadable number, even though in some cases you could apply solid manure up to a 9% slope. So if you look closely at the rules there were cases where those pink areas may be spreadable if you meet the requirements. In version 3, those acres are not removed from spreadable, meaning that it's conceivable that if you have these pink areas in your field, you might have a larger number of winter spreadable acres in version 3 compared to version 2. And what we do in version 3 is we're much more specific about the messaging, where we give you a guidance message when you put a manure application on a field with a 6 to 9% slope, because that could be compliant. And we give you a compliance message when it has greater than 9% slope. So we're just dialing in this specific slope restriction scenario, and we're giving you a message that is relevant to that situation. But those acres are not removed from winter spreadable. Second specific CAFO acre situation would be on these manure restricted W and R soils. So CAFO W, CAFO R, that would be when you have the water table within 24 inches of the surface or bedrock within 24 inches of the surface. And in version 2, those acres, when they appeared in the field, were included as spreadable, regardless of whether or not those field restrictions had been verified or acknowledged by the planner. In version 3, we only include them in spreadable if they've been acknowledged and verified. So if you acknowledge that you're going to check for the shallow water table in those CAFO W areas before you spread, then we will keep those acres in spreadable. But if you don't acknowledge that, then they're removed, because we assume that that is a manure prohibited area if you have not verified or acknowledged. As far as changes that you're going to see from the cropping page to the management page in V3, one big one is that any place that you have double crops in version 2, those often become multiple rows of crops in version 3. So when we translate this winter rye forage to corn silage crop from version 2, we actually see that it becomes 2 separate rows in version 3, where we see the rye winter silage followed by the corn silage in these 2 rows. So for the most part, we're able to just automatically translate that when you see one of those double crops when you convert data into V3. The next is another example of when you might see this invalid crop sequence warning. So this comes up in imported or converted version 2 plans. Anytime you have one of these rotation or crop scenarios that is breaking a rule in SnapPlus version 3. So in this case, we had a situation where the version 2 crops actually resulted in a conflict of two things supposedly being planted at the same time. And this message is saying that you need to pick one crop for that time slot, the 2023 late summer fall time slot, and delete the other one. So there's a few different variations on this message. You'll also see this message when you're missing your alfalfa seeding year, and you'll have options for what you need to do to fix that in that case. And finally, just a reminder that when it comes to manure sources, pay attention on converted plans to what setting you have for displaying inactive sources. So by default, when you bring in an existing plan of version 2 database into V3, some of your manure sources that have been used in the recent planning years will be active. But if you have a lot of old sources in that database that have not been used in many years, those will be set to inactive just to make this page a little easier to view. So the sources are still there. You might just need to turn on this button to see the inactive sources and mark them as active if you have some that you want to appear. All right, we already covered those slides, so I think I will head to my notes here and also check the chat to see what kind of questions we have. Let's see. It's like most of these were covered in the chat. Okay, I think everything else has been covered in the chat. I think I'll read a few of these because they are relevant and I want them on the recording. One person asked, is there a way to work in SnapPlus version 3 without an internet connection? Right now, no, but we're working on that. So that is something that's coming as an ability to work offline and then eventually you'll have to do a upload, find an internet connection, then do an upload so that the data that you've worked offline on your computer syncs up with Maps and with SnapPlus V3 online. So that is coming. And then another question was, is the primary admin permission the only permission that allows making a copy of the plan? That is true. And then a question about adding custom buffers, and that when you're drawing on the maps, do you have the ability to set a custom buffer width? And that feature is also coming. All right. So I'll take a couple minutes here and see if there are any final questions that folks have. And I would say as an end to this presentation, I want to just put up sorry about that, I'm going to put up our support email address, and just comment that as you start to work with SnapPlus version 3 and upload your plans and get used to using it, if you ever need help or have questions or you run into bugs, we really appreciate it if you email us, and this is the best email address to do that. So when you email the support email, that actually goes out to everybody on the SnapPlus team. So all the friendly faces that are at the beginning of the presentation here, all of those folks get an email when you send it to the support email address, and one of us will do our very best to get back to you as quickly as we can and help you resolve that issue. So I've been giving the presentation today, but I want to also acknowledge all the other folks on the SnapPlus team that work really hard to make version 3 a reality. And we know that as we launch and we get a lot more people using the application, that we're going to run into bugs, and we are doing our very best to fix those. And we really appreciate it when you see something that seems kind of funky, seems like a bug. Shoot us an email, send us a screenshot. And one of the great things about this being an online application is that we're able to do fixes much more quickly, and we no longer have to rely on a new update or new release that people download to their computers. We can fix it for everybody right away as soon as we find that bug. So we really appreciate it if you can send us an email and let us know when you find that kind of stuff. So I'll just say thanks, and I think I'll head back to the version 3 screen here just in case there are other features or things that people want to see that I haven't yet covered. All right, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Feel free to send an email if anything comes up. And other than that, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can close out.
Hava, could you please share the CEU one more time?
Yes, I will pull that up now. Right, here it is. Oops. All right, there are CEUs up on the screen.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody else for joining us here today, and a special thank you to Hava and the team for everything that they have done on V3. As you guys start utilizing the program, finding bugs and glitches, please do not hesitate, as Hava said, to send those to the support email. The team has done a fantastic job throughout these in-person trainings that we hosted to fix these bugs in between trainings. So I have been thoroughly impressed with their capabilities and accommodating all of our fun requests that we have for them. If you guys have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, happy planning in V3.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.